All right, first a voice test. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so let's proceed. I hope everybody had a good 10-minute break. And welcome everyone. Good evening, good morning, or whatever. Welcome to our session number 3, which deals with CBDs or central bank digital currencies. And we have a keynote today, or this session will in a moment be delivered by Benoit Curé. Benoit is today the head of the BIS Innovation Hub, BIS, the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, and that's the position he took up earlier this year. Previously, as most of you probably are aware of, Benoit was a member of the executive board of the European Central Bank, and he has also previously chaired the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures at the BIS. Benoit has authored several articles and books on economic policy, the international monetary system, and European integration. As discussant, we were supposed to have Dr. Chu Min, and we would have been very keen on hearing about the Chinese plans, designs, and perhaps implementation, or at least experimentation of CBDC. But as John said earlier, already Chu Min is behind the great firewall, and he couldn't make it to this session, unfortunately. But we have a stuntman. I've asked John Zeisman to stand in for Min Chu. It's a fairly short notice. In soccer, we call this kind of players, we call them super subs. So John will now have to play the role of super sub, and he will pose some questions or comment after Benoit's presentation. And of course, I'm counting on everybody's active participation in this session, as in previous sessions. Before giving the floor to Benoit, I'd like to do some warm-up and start with a recollection related to the session we are now having. Over two years ago, the Bank of Finland hosted a conference in Helsinki called Money in the Digital Age. And one of our keynote speakers was the Nobel laureate Bengt Holmström, who said only half jokingly that it would be good if some non-systemic country like Sweden or Uruguay would first pilot a CBDC. He had probably financial stability considerations or concerns in his mind. Such pilots are now underway, but we also see that there is more and more movement by the larger central banks. For instance, the Eurosystem set up a high-level task force early this year to analyze the potential benefits and risks of a CBDC in the euro area. The thinking of the group has been summarized in a report just recently published by the ECB, which means that the ECB is moving from being a latecomer to being, together with some others, on the front row on analyzing a CBDC. So we see important movement in this field, and I think in today's session we will have several questions to be discussed, and without prejudging what Benoit will say and what we will discuss, but I believe that today We will discuss the CBDC in a broader context and issues like why issue CBDCs in the first place, what role will global cooperation play in this regard, what's the role of the BIS, and what could be a roadmap towards experimentation and perhaps one day even implementation of a retail CBDC, if we get really serious about that. So these are issues that we will probably discuss in this session, and now I would like to hand over to Benoit. So Benoit, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oli, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Very well.
Very good. So good morning from Basel, where actually night has already fallen. Oli, thank you for your introduction, and thank you for reminding us that I had to leave the ECB for the ECB to start discussing CBDC in earnest. So I don't know if it's causality or correlation. I have prepared a few slides, so let me try to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see
my screen.
Yeah, it works very well.
Yes. Okay, very good. What I'm really going to do in this presentation is to introduce the discussion by taking the central banker's perspective. So there will be a lot of, in a sense, I'm taking the discussion where the last session left it, with remarks on the role of central bank money, and I'm going to guide you through central bankers' thinking about CBDC, partly based on a report which was released a few days ago, 10 days ago, by 7 central banks together with the BIS, and I will come back to it in a second. And I'd like to take a step back and start by reflecting on why should central banks be interested in CBDC in the first place, and where is it coming from, before we dive into the details. Okay, I'm trying to change my slide. It seems I can't do it. Can you see the next slide? Yeah. So so this slide is really about, just as a warming up to it's a few recent news reports that just illustrate the fact that CBDC has really kind of forced its way to the top of policy making agenda, which is actually quite recent. So that's just a few random, news headlines about CBDC, and it's actually quite recent. And I think it's fair to say that, well, in a sense, CBDC is not a new discussion. Some central banks have started reflecting on CBDC already years ago, particularly the Swedish Riksbank and the People's Bank of China. They've started working on CBDC already 5-6 years ago, and also a few pioneers in the emerging and developing world, like the Bahamas are a well-known example. But the kind of stepped up interest into CBDC really dates from last year. There is a kind of general approach to CBDC, at least in the press, which tells you that central banks have started thinking about CBDC because of Facebook, right? Or the other version of it is they've started thinking about CBDC because of China, because they don't want to let China be the first mover. And then you have a third angle, which is a technological angle. That is, are they going to do CBDC based on a blockchain? Or are they going to use smart contracts, and so on and so forth? And what I want to do here is to take a little bit of a different perspective and to actually relate CBDC to what central banks do, which is at a very high level to deliver price stability and financial stability. And the short version of my presentation is really that central banks are now into CBDC, or at least considering CBDC, because they just want to be able to continue doing what they do. That is to deliver stable financial systems and to deliver stable currencies. So I'm tempted to call it the Lampedusa principle applied to monetary policy, right? For those of you who read the Leopard, it's well, you must change everything so that everything can stay the same. It's a little bit the mindset of central banks today. So let me start with a definition, because CBDC, central bank digital currency, is a little bit of a misnomer. It is because most of central bank money is actually digital already. So you might wonder what's new here. Yes, it is digital, but that's because it's bank reserves, the central bank crediting the accounts of commercial banks, deposit-taking banks at the central bank, and that's the way central bank do monetary policy. So the vast, I mean, the almost all central bank money is already digital money because it's bank reserves. So what we're talking about here, it's different. It is any currency which is the liability of a central bank. That's for the CB, and which is digital, so not physical. So we're not talking of banknotes, obviously, and which is not bank reserves, right? Which have been there for decades. And you have this very nice Venn diagram, which we often call the money flower, which kind of orders, classifies different kinds of money, depending on whether it's electronic or physical, depending on whether it's widely accessible or not, depending on whether it's a liability of the central bank or not. And CBDC is really at the center, at the intersection of all these circles. So obviously you do have digital currency, which is not a central bank digital currency, and you also do have central bank money, which is not CBDC. Which is either banknotes or central bank reserves. So we now have a survey at the BIS. Every year we ask central banks around the world about their interest in CBDC and why they're interested. And what you can see on this slide is a very, very sharp increase in interest towards CBDC. So to put it simply, and that dates back from the beginning of this year, so the numbers would be even higher today, I guess. But basically in February 2020, 80% of central banks around the world were declaring an engagement in CBDC work, right? So they were thinking about it, reflecting on it. And then at the right-hand side, you can see that 40% of central banks were doing experiments, proofs of concepts, that is building prototypes of CBDCs, and 10% of them were running pilot projects. And the best known of them, as you certainly have seen in the news, is a pilot project currently run by the PBOC of its so-called DCEP project, Digital Currency Electronic Payments, where they've done a lottery in Shenzhen and other places, and they've allocated randomly CBDC to actually millions of consumers in Shenzhen and other places to have them start playing with it and testing it. So it's really a pilot project in real life. But it's only 10% of central banks doing that. But at the other hand, you can see that 80% are interested and working on it. And you can also see that interest is both towards what we call wholesale CBDC, which is CBDC to be used in financial market infrastructures, not to be used by the public. And what's called here a general purpose CBDC, which is retail CBDC, which are digital banknotes, if you want to call them like this. And these are really two different avenues, two different lines of work. And so we're also asking central banks why they would be issuing CBDC. And without going into the details here, the answers are, and focusing on the left-hand side, which is general purpose CBDC, retail CBDC. You can see that the answers are slightly different depending on whether we ask central banks in advanced economies, these are the blue bars, or central banks in emerging market economies, the red bars, or the pinkish bars. And you can see, so to put it simply, the rationale towards doing CBDC in advanced economies is tilted towards concerns around the disappearance of cash and declining demand for cash, and the need to keep providing citizens, households, with a means of payment which is a liability of the central bank. So fears or concerns that commercial money, as credit card payments, as payments on smartphones, etc., would entirely crowd out central bank money, which would leave citizens without access to the safest means of payment, which is central bank money, which they currently have as banknotes, but maybe for not so long. And in emerging market economies, you have different considerations coming in, particularly financial inclusion. So the hope that CBDC could be a way to support financial inclusion. And also, broadly speaking, the convenience of payments, that is the cost and speed of payments. And they are concerned, for instance, very practically in some places, it's just costly and dangerous to move cash around, right? In some places. And presumably CBDC would make it less costly and safe. So you can see that advanced economies and emerging market economies are coming from different places here. So as I said, there has been a kind of a turning point in the interest towards CBDC, which has prompted 7 central banks. So you can see the flags here. It's a kind of a G7, but it's not the usual G7. It's a G7 where we would have kicked out France, Italy, and Germany, and invited Switzerland, Sweden, and the ECB in Europe, and that was together with the BIS. And I've led that work together with John Cunliffe from the Bank of England, and we've spent a number of months working on it. And the report was released 10 days ago. And what we do in this report is really to start from first principles. That is, which kind of means of payment and which kind of currency do we need if we want to keep providing what citizens expect us to provide, which is financial stability and monetary stability. And it starts from the very simple fact that central bank money is at the heart of the financial system. There are principles for financial market infrastructures and payment systems, which say that as much as possible, transactions in core payment systems and core financial market infrastructures should be settled in central bank money. And that should stay even in a digital world. And as I said, there are fears that cash may disappear faster in some countries, but still, and that citizens may be left without access to a very safe means of payment, which is central bank money. And so, starting from these very simple starting points, we identify principles, fundamental principles, and there are 3 principles. And I'm not going into further detail because that's all in the report. But the principles are, first, that CBDC should do no harm to central banks pursuing their mandates. That is, it should not interfere, or at least it should not hamper the ability of central banks to deliver financial stability and monetary stability, right? And in a sense, the perspective we're taking in the report is that we really see CBDC as a means of payment. We don't want to see it as an instrument of monetary policy. That's a big discussion, obviously, and it is an instrument of monetary policy also. But that would be a different angle, and that would have to be discussed by monetary policy committees, by the FOMC, by the ECB Governing Council, and so on and so forth. And it's a different discussion, right? So we really focus on CBDC as a means of payment and as a way to maintain stability in the financial system. And that's the first principle. And the second principle is that, which is very important as well, is that we want to ensure a coexistence and complementarity between public and private forms of money. That is, we don't believe in a world where CBDC would take over, where central banks would take over, and where CBDC would crowd out all kinds of commercial money. There has always been coexistence in the system between central bank money and commercial money, and that's going to stay. We just want to be sure that it stays in a way that central bank money can continue playing its role at the heart of the system. But there will be commercial money, and there will be cryptocurrencies and all that. We just want to see an ecosystem where central banks can continue to provide stability. And the third principle is that we want to promote innovation and efficiency in the system. And innovation is key here, and that implies that the private sector will have a huge role to play. Just to give an obvious example, none of the participants in this group believe that central banks should provide wallets, right? They might create issue CBDC, but the wallets on which CBDC will be held are to be provided by the private sector. That's not an area where central banks have a comparative advantage, and that's an area where we've seen massive technical change for the benefit of the consumers, and that has to stay. So that's just an example. And then we decline a number of key features that CBDC would have to meet in order to meet these fundamental principles. And an important dimension of it is international consistency, which is why all these guys have been getting together and taking the pain to produce a joint report. And so all CBDCs will be different, obviously. CBDC is also a political discussion. Issues such as anonymity, or the trade-off between, a fight against anti-money laundering and fight against terrorism, and privacy. That's a key trade-off, which may have different answers in different places, and that has to be a political discussion. There is no doubt about that. Also, technology might be different, and financial structures are different. So CBDCs will be different, but we want CBDCs to be consistent so that the system can keep working as a system. That's really the essence of what we are doing here. And it kind of nicely echoes a big action plan that was agreed last week by our G20 finance ministers and governors on improving cross-border payments. And CBDC can be part of it. It can be one way, among others, to make cross-border payments cheaper and faster. We can come back to this in the discussion. So it's also part of a broader agenda to improve global payments. So what are the next steps? So this group will keep working as a group along two dimensions, practical dimensions. So having joint experiments and pilots. Well, pilots, maybe not, but at least experiments and concepts. And also they want to dig deeper into some policy issues. Just to give you the flavor of it, one obvious policy question is how do we make sure that CBDC does not create financial instability by substituting to bank deposits, right? How do we avoid digital runs in this new world? How do we make sure that central bank balance sheets do not crowd out the balance sheet of commercial banks, and that credit intermediation continues to be done by private players? And there are answers to it, but it needs a little bit more discussion. So these are the two work streams. And I end my presentation with a little bit of showcasing for what I do. That is the Innovation Hub of the Bank for International Settlements. And we are prepared to play a key role in that discussion. So today we have we've been opened by the BIS last year, and I moved from the ECB to the BIS to help Agustin Carstens kickstart this project. We currently have 3 centers in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and in Switzerland, which are joint projects with the local central banks, so HKMA, MAS, and FNB. And the BIS board decided a few months ago to open 4 new centers in Toronto, in Stockholm, in London, and in Frankfurt and Paris on behalf of the Eurosystem. And we're also preparing a strategic partnership with the Fed based in New York, with the New York Fed. And so ultimately we'll have 7 centers and this partnership with the Fed. We are working on a number of issues, many of which have nothing to do with CBDC. So quite a lot of RegTech and SubTech. Work on payments also unrelated to CBDC. And we're going to start work on cybersecurity and on open finance. And what we do is really building prototypes, so it's a laboratory. It's not based on research. We have coders, IT specialists, and we want to build prototypes that we can hand over to the banking community for them to consider and to learn from them. And just to give you the flavor of what we can do on CBDC, and that will be my last slide, we've started building a DLT capacity to be able to try with different blockchain solutions. We have very advanced work on wholesale CBDC. So we have a project with the Swiss National Bank and with the Swiss Stock Exchange to send central bank money on a tokenized platform where securities are exchanged as tokens. And we are testing two ways to settle these tokens in central bank money. One way, which is token versus token settlement. So the SNB issues a digital franc as a token on the platform. And the other one is a token versus account settlement. That is, we build a link between the tokenized platform and the Swiss RTGS system. So we are really experimenting with different ways to achieve what we want to achieve, which is to provide some money to that kind of tokenized environment. In 2021, we'll be kickstarting work on retail CBDC, also based on the report I've just highlighted. And we'll be working for the G20 by co-leading with the Committee on Markets and Payments and Market Infrastructures two of the 19 building blocks of the G20 agenda on cross-border payments. One on the possibility for new global payment platforms, and the other one on the cross-border linkages and spillovers created by CBDC. And on these two topics, we plan to work very closely with the IMF, with the World Bank, and with the central banking community more generally. So I stop here, and what you can see on this last slide is the ad we've pushed to Twitter when we were hiring a blockchain specialist for the BIS Innovation Hub. So the question was, are you daydreaming about creating your own currency? And we had 150 applications also. So the answer was yes. And I stop here.